All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Generation 180's Ask an EV Owner event. If you're considering an electric vehicle and you have questions that need answers, then you're in the right place. Today, we're joined by Andrea from Green Latinos and three great EV owners. And a special thanks to our team members working behind the scenes to help support this event. Before we get started, Andrea and I will tell you briefly about our organizations. Next slide. Generation 180 is a national nonprofit organization based in Charlottesville, Virginia, working to inspire and equip individuals to take action on clean energy. Next slide. We're working to flip the energy script, helping us move from a narrative focused on climate doom and gloom to a story focused on where we need to go, a world powered by 100% clean energy. A story that says we can do this and we all have a role to play. We focus on individuals in their homes and communities because your energy matters. Certain behaviors and technologies not only help fight climate change, but they also help to build the social momentum and political will we need to get big system level changes. We lead with two major nationwide campaigns, Solar for All Schools and Electrify Your Ride, which works to make EVs more accessible. Solar and EVs are clean energy solutions proven to address two of the largest sources of carbon dioxide, emissions from electricity generation and transportation. And now, Andrea, you want to tell us a little bit about Green Latinos?
Sure. Good evening, all. My name is Andrea Marpilero-Colomina. I'm the Clean Transportation Advocate at Green Latinos. Green Latinos is a national nonprofit organization. We convene a broad coalition of Latino advocates working across the environmental spectrum. The majority of our work sort of falls into 5 overlapping issue areas: climate change and clean air, public lands and ocean, clean transportation, water equity, public lands, and environmental justice and civil rights. So what we do as an organization is we directly engage with communities, advocates, and policymakers. So that's folks sort of working on the ground in their communities, advocates that may represent specific communities, issues, or cities, and policymakers at all levels with a focus on the federal government. So when it comes to transportation, we're really interested in particular in creating equitable policy that addresses and makes reparations for the barriers and disproportionate impacts faced by Latino and other communities, both historically and the present day when it comes to emissions, access, public transportation service, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide. So when it comes to clean transportation, we are really interested in sort of the overlapping questions of access to green infrastructure, clean jobs, and environmental reparations. Latinos are overrepresented among people living in poverty and face poorer health outcomes due to systemic environmental and economic inequity. Some of that is related to transportation. If you don't have access to healthcare and to jobs, you can't really improve your health and economic outcomes. The other sort of piece of this that's really interesting is that Latinos are very concerned about climate change. As a group, they are perhaps the most concerned group, and they are the most interested in seeing government taking action on reducing pollution and creating incentives for innovation when it comes to clean transportation. Next slide. So when it comes to EVs in particular, it's really interesting. There's really limited data on EVs and use of electric vehicles for Latinos and the challenges that they face specifically as consumers. But there was a great nationally representative consumer survey conducted by Consumer Reports in 2019 that found that 71% of drivers are interested in getting an electric car, but what's holding them back is either their perception of the cost or the realities of the cost, since the majority of drivers don't purchase new cars and there are pretty limited incentives for used EVs. And the second thing that really was a flag for many potential EV drivers was concern about access to public charging infrastructure. And so if we imagine that these issues are sort of replicating the existing inequities that exist in Latino communities, so lack of access to public charging infrastructure can sort of go in the lack of access to transportation infrastructure bucket, and cost can go into the sort of economic disadvantage bucket. So as an organization, we're really interested in equity. We're really interested in having conversations with as many people as possible, with as many different sort of representatives of transportation users. And that's part of the reason we're so excited to be joining Generation 180 this evening for this really important conversation with EV drivers who have different vehicles, use their EVs in different ways, and live in different places. So thanks so much for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrea. So just before we get started, a few quick housekeeping items. All attendees will be on mute throughout the event, so use the Q&A to ask your questions. We'll get to as many of them as we can over the next hour. So without further ado, Natalie, do you want to kick us off? Introduce yourself, where you're from, what you've been driving?
Absolutely. I'm Natalie Batman. It is really B-A-T-M-A-N, like the superhero. Everybody asks. I live in Charlottesville, Virginia. I drive a BMW i3, and I'm really excited to be here tonight. Thanks, Stuart.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. Elvia.
My name's Elvia Thompson. Elvia Hernandez Thompson, and I drive a Chevy Bolt. It's my third EV. My first one was a Mercedes B-Class, which isn't made anymore. I leased that some years ago, and then when I went back, the lease was over and I went back to get another one. They didn't make them anymore. In fact, Mercedes backed off from EVs entirely. So I got a 2018 Chevy Bolt, which I liked a lot. And when that lease was over, then I got a 2020 Chevy Bolt, and never looked back. I am so happy that when I get in the car, it's like guilt-free, no emissions coming out the back. And I am like the ambassador for EVs. Everybody who knows me is like, oh no, not her again. But I just think it's something that everybody can do. I run an environmental nonprofit called Annapolis Green and Climate Change, which I'm now calling Climate Disruption. This is driving electric is something almost everybody can do on a personal level to do something to reduce. As individuals, we can't do a lot, but we can do something. And if we all do something together, then we can make a difference.
Awesome. That's really inspiring. Thank you, Elvia. Chris, how about you?
Yes, hi. So Chris Lepe. I live in San Jose, California, soon to be living in Santa Clara, California. Longtime renter, for context, and had an EV. My first EV was a Chevy Volt, and at least that for 3 years. And then just recently, about a year ago, purchased a used 2019 Leaf, and we love it. And definitely wouldn't go back. We still hang on to one of our old gas cars. So we have a 2005 Acura that we use for additional trips when needed and longer trips. Just to say, I kind of have a part of a sort of a larger family of EV owners. My brother was actually the first to purchase a Chevy Bolt, and then I followed suit. My brother-in-law also has a Nissan Leaf. So definitely, although I tend to be seen as like more of the sibling that is very environmentally conscious, my other brothers and sisters, my other siblings have purchased or leased vehicles, EVs. And so that to me is a signal of us hitting the critical mass.
Awesome. And last but not least, Shay, why don't you introduce yourself, where you're from, what kind of electric vehicle are you driving?
So I'm Shay Franco-Clausen, native of Santa Clara County, San Jose to be exact. And I am vice chair of the Open Space Authority. I'm a complete environmentalist to my core and stand on the shoulders of my papi, who is a big time environmentalist. And so we did the Chevy, the Volt 2, and then turned it in and got the Prius because we had those longer trips. And, we have a family of 5 kids, and we had to, come to some compromise. And then the Tesla, the Model T is what we just got. So we can have sort of like that flex between the two is one, when we go on longer trips, I'm in Sacramento a lot advocating for policy, and I need, a longer drive sometimes. And then, but we're a sustainable family. We compost, like we grow our own food. So we always try to have the smallest carbon footprint. And it really matters mostly when we're driving around our community as well. And I want to say something that Chris, who's my longtime friend, who I love and adore, is unfortunately communities like ours, like he said, a renter, we're no longer a renter. After December, we'll be in Hayward because we're first generations to buy in both of our families. And so we have to think about the how poverty really plays into people being able to not go over to EV or even fuel flex, because the cost of these, like for us, we had to save up. We had to sell, one liver, to get the heart. And so when it comes to all of these different things, we have to really consider, the economic, impacts that some people can and some people can't. And so I hope that this conversation expands to how do we make this state, proactive in making sure that not just those that can, but those who want have access to these.
That's great. Welcome all of you. And, Chris and Shay, you mentioned your family, and Elvia, you mentioned some of your friends. It's kind of our first question. How did your friends or family react when you told them, oh, I got an electric vehicle? Or was it, shock, or were they like, yeah, right on? And they, how was that kind of experience? Natalie, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, sure. My first driving experience was a Ford F-350 stick shift diesel. So my family definitely, they like diesel vehicles, and they raised their eyebrows for sure, but then they kind of got used to it, and they were like, it's actually kind of cool. So for me, my family was kind of like skeptical. I do have a very cool aunt who taught me everything I know about solar and is an electrical engineer, and was like, right on, like regenerative braking is the coolest. And yeah, so I had one rooting for me, and the rest kind of took me a little while to win them over. When they heard that it was BMW's fastest 0 to 60 miles per hour, I think that was the moment when I sort of
very cool.
Had a little bit higher level of interest.
Elvia, how about you? Friends and family's reaction?
Oh, with the first car, the Mercedes, which had a range of 85 miles, there wasn't a lot of infrastructure for charging at that time. My friend said, oh, well, that's nice, but I can't do that. Well, why not? Well, I just can't. They had no answer. It was just, they just refused to think in a different way. But now I think that there's more acceptance of it and realization that, the good things about driving electric. And I neglected to say I'm in Annapolis, Maryland. So we're kind of in a little sort of a progressive bubble here in Annapolis. And there's a lot of interest and a lot of charging now. But still there are people. I just finished a trip to Florida in my car. And when I told a friend of mine,
Awesome.
a friend of mine who I'd known forever, I said, oh, I'm driving to Florida next week. And she said, oh, you can't do that. You have an electric car. And I said, yes, I can. Yes, I can. Where have you been? So it was no problem. It was no problem. I mean, it's, you just plan ahead, you plan your trip and take the time to do it. I mean, if you pull in, I charge mainly at level 3 charging, which is fast charging for those DC fast charging, for those of you who aren't familiar with these terms. And in my car, I can get about 100 miles in 30 minutes. And people I know said, well, I'm not going to stop for 30 minutes when I can gas up a car in 5. And I said, listen, you pull into a service plaza on 95 or Turnpike or something, and you go in and you go to the bathroom and you get something to eat. And you know what? Just about a half hour has gone by. So, just think about this differently.
Yeah.
Sorry, long answer, short question.
No, that's great. That's great. Shay, it sounds like your family probably would have been very supportive and not surprised. How was that for you?
My dad would be supportive, and there's 12 of us. So I have 9 brothers and 2 sisters. And actually, even my kids made fun of me. They're like, really, this little rinky-dink car? And I think me and Chris, me and Osh got them at the same time. Assuming they were Oshkosh, we got them at the same time. And it just didn't work it was small for our family, it just didn't work. But they made fun of me. But when I got the Prius, they even made even more fun of me. But my daughter, once she drove it for a week while I was out of the state, and she's like, I'm tripping. Why would I want to spend so much money? She's like, you got like 700 miles to the tank. Why would I do this? And I'm making an impact. So my daughter now successfully has a Prius. She has a Fuel Flex. And then my brother, I work on criminal justice reform, and my brother, we just got him out of jail for being shot by the police. And he was picking between a BMW. And I was like, they don't have any Priuses available. And he's like, you're right. You did drive me around in that Prius and it got good. So he today got a Prius. So even if I'm getting them to Fuel Flex vehicles, in order to reduce their carbon footprint, that's a step in the right direction. And most of our friends have Teslas. So, I mean,
Wow.
it was
Yeah.
kind of that's the car that drives around.
Shay, I think we could have a whole nother webinar just on some of the things you've alluded to. Chris, to wrap this question up, friends and family's reaction?
Yeah, no, I think, as I mentioned before, I'm sort of the greenie in the family. And so if anything, people's reaction was probably like, what took you so long? And what took me so long is the price point primarily. I would have adopted an electric vehicle a long time ago if I had the resources for it. But yeah, I think we've hit a point where these vehicles, especially in the used vehicle market, are becoming a lot more accessible. I think I got my 2019 Nissan Leaf with only 4,000 miles on it for 18,000, which I mean, that's, as far as I know, that's like what most vehicles out there, probably your kind of like practical vehicles cost, right? Or even more affordable. So yeah, I think that was primarily probably the reaction. By then, my sister and my brother had already purchased EVs or leased EVs, so it wasn't anything unusual. And as Shay also alluded to, I mean, here in Silicon Valley in the Bay Area, the adoption of electric vehicles is so high that nobody even bats an eye anymore about the EV thing. Now, there are other areas where I know for a fact that's not the case. Like if one of my best friends from high school moved out to Manteca in the Central Valley of California and bought a Tesla, and got a lot of like raised eyebrows and whatnot about that, comments made and this and that. So it's I definitely get it, depending on the area that you're at. But these cars are just so practical once you drive them, and so fun to drive. Oftentimes, once you drive them, it's like hard to go back. And I think the more that people see that, the more that people experience that, it's not even really a question anymore in people's minds.
Awesome.
Thank you. You've sort of all started to answer the next question a bit, but I'm really interested to hear a bit about how driving an EV has impacted your daily life and how it's sort of changed maybe the way you get around or the way you think about the different places that you have to go. So it would be wonderful to hear from all of you on this. Shay, maybe we'll start with you, just because you sort of touched on many different sort of the influence on your family and sort of that, it's really interesting to hear more about that would be great. And anything else, of course, you want to share with us.
I try to use public transportation as much as possible when I can. I actually will now be closer to the BART, which is I'm super excited about, to be honest. And some of my trips I tend to take to the Capitol, I'll just take the train. I figure that's less cars on the road. Somebody will pick me up from the Capitol at the train station. But when it comes to, I travel between here and LA and the Capitol so much. If I can take a train or other means of transportation, I will. But sometimes in California, you unfortunately have to drive. And I would say that most of my friends and families could, get the cards if one, they were affordable, and two, if they had access. So it does come, and me and Chris have talked about this so much, is about access. And I think that I sometimes tend to rather use public transportation than drive, also so I can do work at the same time. But also just, I don't enjoy traffic at all. It's not my favorite time in the world. So anytime that I can avoid it myself, I try to just drive less. I just drive, or if I can go to the grocery store, it's down the block, I can ride my bike. So sometimes it's not even using my vehicle if I don't have to. Being a mom, I don't know other parents, when your kids are active in sports, you really don't have a choice. You're going to do a lot of commuting. So when I don't have to drive, I don't drive.
Mhm.
Was that your question? I'm sorry.
No, that is great. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about those times when you do have to drive, sort of how having an EV has changed that, or if it has, or
Oh,
if
it
you're
does.
sort
Well,
of.
I get to ride in the express lane. I'm just going to say that.
There you go.
That's a win. And I think I watched the car and how it's functions, and it gives you like a report out of,
Yeah.
It made me actually I have a metal foot. It slowed me down. I'll be honest. Isn't this a space of transparency and honesty? And it has absolutely slowed me down. I actually look to see if I'm staying under 25, so I can just use the charge and no gas at all. So it's sort of changed my thinking, not just to be doing something for the environment, but also how I show up on the road. And I think that is really critical, because we don't think about it. It's like that insurance, is it Progressive, where they're like, you drive really slow to get the discount. Well, I'm just trying to get the readout at the end of my drive.
It's like a game. Yeah.
Right. So I think that's how it's really made me show up differently on the road, and be more conscious of not using the gas component of the Prius. The Tesla's completely different. That's completely different.
So Shay, a couple of times, this has only happened twice in like 7 or 8 years, but a couple of times because of regenerative braking, I've actually come home with more miles than I left with without charging. I mean, like just 1 or 2 miles, but it can happen.
Thank you for that. Trying to get the whole family to go, just so you know. I really want the entire family. I have drive a 1963 Chevy Corvair, and I've had it since I was 18. And my friends are like, don't you want to, turn that in for like one of your fuel efficient cars? And it may be the running joke, but I'm really considering it.
On the regenerative braking, I'll just jump in. Like, that's my favorite thing, owning an EV. Honestly, it sounds weird, but that one pedal driving, those of you that are familiar with it,
Yep.
like you hardly ever have to push on the brake. And that's good, obviously, for like, conserving your brakes over time and everything. But it's a pretty cool feeling when you're going downhill, including like really steep roads, and you never have to press on the brake the whole time. And at the same time, you're sucking up that energy, right, that's being consumed by or being produced by the regenerative braking, and you're seeing those miles come back. It's an awesome feeling. I love that about EVs.
The other thing about not hitting the brakes too is every time that with that friction with the brakes, there are particles of the stuff that the brake pads are made out of that end up on the road. And then when it rains, that becomes part of the stormwater runoff, which goes into the closest stream. So there's another benefit too.
Totally.
Can I just be honest and say that I'd never heard of that statement ever in my life, and I've always wondered what that was, why the car does that. So thank the both of you for breaking that down for me. I couldn't understand why it does that.
That's a win. When our EV owners learn something new on Ask EV Owner, I think that's we can chalk it up as a win.
A learning experience for all. Yeah, I would love if others want to share a bit about how having an EV has changed, an aspect of your life or sort of the way that you drive. I think, that theory, that was so interesting, Shay, to sort of think about how now it's kind of a different game for you, right? You're sort of seeking to go slow because because of sort of the consciousness about, being so efficient in that way. That was really, really interesting. And also must create a really different experience in the car, right? Instead of trying to get to wherever you're going as fast as possible, you're sort of doing the opposite. But it would be great to hear, if others want to share about, their experience driving an EV and how that's changed sort of the way that they are on the road or think about being on the road. That would be wonderful.
I'd love to. I have also found my driving gamified, watching the miles per kilowatt hour go up and down. One awesome thing, I was driving my daughter to school the other day, and we had the windows down because I love to drive with the windows down like all year long. My kids hate it. And they were smelling fumes. My kids were smelling fumes. She was like, Mama, how long do you think it will be before all vehicles are electric and don't have those smells? And I was like, that's what she's thinking about. Like, when are we going to get to that positive place in the future? And that was so cool. Especially because when she was born, I was living and working in China, and I moved back here mostly so that she could breathe clean air and have access to nature. So it was a pretty cool moment driving with her, to have that kind of come full circle. One of the things that I've noticed that's kind of funny is because there is no noise when it's all electric, you freak people out if you like come up on them at an intersection, because they're used to hearing a car and they're like, oh my God. So I kind of like, I don't know, I'm just really, I give pedestrians a lot of space and like go really slow just in case they don't hear me, because they, a lot of the time, and I do this myself when I'm going to cross the street, a lot of the time I'm listening and looking most of the time, hopefully, but that's kind of throws people to not have the noise. I have only ever used a public charger because I wanted to test out the new ones that are going in Charlottesville. So I've used a couple of those, but actually I really only use my car for driving around town, and I plug it into a 110 volt charger. I don't have a special charger. It's,
Yeah, I don't either. Yeah.
It's like, it didn't really change a whole lot about my other needs. And I never run out of charge, driving around town. So pretty awesome. And my car also has a 2-gallon gas backup, which if I do want to go down and see my family in Central Virginia, it's like 2-hour round trip. Sometimes I end up using that, and it's great to have that as a backup, but I don't use it often.
On the public charger things, I don't know if I'm going out of off of the sort of the topic here or the main question, but I saw also that there's a question in the chat about public chargers. For me, I had the opposite experience. For most of our time with EVs, we actually, as I mentioned, have been renters, and so therefore did not have access to a charger at home. And so we knew basically like all of the public chargers out there in the area where we live and take trips and stuff. We were well aware of where the charges are at, looking at the apps, whether it be Charge Point or some of the other ones out there. So we're kind of a little bit of like EV owner nomads for like 3-4 years there, kind of roaming around and using the chargers. We had one charging facility that was about 1.5 miles from our house, from our apartment, and we would in the evenings with the Volt, right? We'd drop it off and then head back home or wherever, and come back. And it was just sort of an opportunity to get some like a little stroll in for the day, a little like 2-3 mile stroll, and get some free charging from that particular facility. But in terms of the conditions, and it was one of the questions in the chat, the conditions of the chargers, it just sort of it does depend. In my experience, it probably depends geographically too, but for the most part, I found that the chargers, tend to be 90-some% of the time, they seem to be working fine. Every once in a while, you will come up with a charger that may not be working. The other thing that I found is, as a EV charging nomad, is that there are a lot of chargers out there, but they're not always publicly accessible. So here in Mountain View, for example, we're currently living just for a few months, there are chargers everywhere because you have all these like corporate campuses that surround us. But those chargers, even when no one's using them, you can't access them. And so for me, that would be like one thing that, as a policy shift, I think that would be a really, really good shift, is to make sure that those private chargers are accessible to the public as well, where you pay you might pay a whatever fee that they want. You charge $10 a kilowatt hour or whatever you want, but make it accessible to folks, so just a couple of like tidbits of my experience roaming around and using almost like 100% public chargers there. Right now we have a charger. We actually just recently had a charger installed at the apartment that we're at. So that's been a game changer. I feel it's really nice. I will say that, to be able to have that ability to be able to charge at your residence and not have to sort of think about where you're going to charge your car.
So my comment on this topic is that to some extent, it driving it electric determines where I go for some things. So when I was, for instance, when I was planning ahead hotels where I was going to stay on my way down to Florida, I would find out if they had chargers or not, and prefer those places. The same with restaurants, so this is what I tell the business people here where I live, to convince them that that this is how we electric car drivers select where we're going to go shopping, for instance, or where we're going to go eat, and that it makes sense for them to put in charging even at their own expense.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's I think a lot of people have concerns about going electric. Did you have any specific concerns about going electric before you did? And how has being an EV owner kind of addressed those? There was a study from Consumer Reports a few months ago that says like owning an EV cures range anxiety. Did you guys experience anything like that yourselves? Natalie, you want to start?
Yeah, totally. I actually, the reason I originally got an EV, I had wanted to get one for a long time, but I had a business reason because I was trying to go into business with an EV company out of China. And I was putting together a slide about range anxiety. And I thought, I can't talk about this. I haven't had this. So I actually got my car in order to feel range anxiety. And I did for a bit because of the uncertainty of what I was embarking upon, right? I wasn't used to thinking about my days in terms of how many miles am I going to be traveling in a day. But humans are incredibly adaptable and we learn really fast. And it's actually not hard at all. It just takes a little bit of getting used to and maybe a little more planning than we're accustomed to. But I've found it actually really easy. I love that. Owning an EV cures range anxiety. Yes, it did for me. I experienced it and then it cured.
Mm-hmm.
Shay, how about you? Any initial concerns that were solved by ownership?
You know what, I'm gonna have to say, I have to echo Natalie, because it's not something you actually think about. When you have a busy day, you're moving along. If you're not consciously thinking, about distance, and you're not consciously thinking about how you show up, like I was saying, on the road, it's something that you don't really think about. But I think Chris might be able to expand more on this.
Yeah.
And by the way, Chris, I just want to say,
yeah,
I want to talk to you afterwards about your installation, because we just plug right up to the house and we have solar panels now. So I'd love to talk to you offline.
Nice. Let's do it. Yeah. On the range anxiety thing, for those of you that are concerned about the range issue, I feel like the plug-in hybrids are really a great way to go, to be able to get your feet wet with sort of the EV technology, and not necessarily have to have that anxiety of, oh, my electric juice is gonna run out. Now, the thing with the plug-in hybrids that you end up experiencing is that you have a much smaller electric battery with the gas tank, right? And so you end up getting this feeling of, for example, the Chevy Volt, I think it's like a 50-mile range for the electric battery. So you get this feeling of like, oh man, my like EV juice is gonna run out. And so it kind of creates this, like, it's not necessarily anxiety, but it's sort of like this feeling of like, how can I conserve that EV juice the most so that I can continue to use it down the road or whatever, right? You have to start thinking about those things, but I wouldn't necessarily call that range anxiety. Now for having a full EV, like the Nissan Leaf that we purchased, I haven't actually experienced range anxiety for the most part, except when like kind of pushing it to the limits in terms of taking it like on longer distance trips. But my answer to that is like, just know the vehicle that you're purchasing and make sure that it's going to fit your the need or the purpose that you're trying to have it serve. So if you get yourself a vehicle that has like 150-mile range, that'll get you to a lot of places within your typical commute shed, right? Grocery stores, everything. Most of your basic needs will be met by that electric vehicle. Now you may not want to take it on a 300-mile trip because you're going to have to charge in between. You can still do that, but if you have an alternative vehicle, as is our case, maybe that's the car to use. So it's just like, use the tool for the purpose that it makes the most sense for, right? We probably use the Leaf for like 80% of our trips, and then the Acura we'll use for the remaining. That makes sense for those trips. So that's my answer to the range anxiety concern.
You know what? I just want to come back and say that the only time I had that issue is when I had the Volt. And because you're not used to it, right? You're just not, but I think that anxiety did drive me to get the Prius, so I had that flexibility to between the two. And so that was the only time, because you are worried, like, am I going to make it to the school and get home in time? You have that little bit of worry. And now that I really think about it, it really pushed me to go get the Prius.
Elvia, any initial concerns about EVs that kind of cured themselves once you had some seat time?
Well, not exactly. But I went from a car that had a range of 85 miles to one that had an EPA range of 239, and I can get like 270 out of it. So that was like getting out of jail, it made a huge difference. It really did. But I'm a little more hardliner than some of you folks. So I don't advise anybody to get a hybrid at all because of the infrastructure and how it's growing. Now, all that depends on where you live. If you live in Montana or Wyoming or someplace where there just isn't a lot of infrastructure, then that's a whole different thing. But you're right, Chris, the battery on hybrids the battery range in hybrids are so small that basically what you have is you have a gas car with a tiny little battery. It's not an electric car with gas. I'd look at it the other way. But as far as range anxiety, when I drove on my way down to Florida, I stopped to see somebody in Charlottesville, and I charged up at the Water Street garage. And then I drove to see somebody else in Danville. Well, Danville, Virginia is in the middle of nowhere. So I had to reroute through Roanoke to charge so that I'd have enough juice when I left my friend's house in Danville to be able to get to a hotel outside of Danville. So sometimes, you always have to have a plan B. And back to what Chris said earlier too, sometimes you will get to a charging station and the hardware will be broken or something like that. So you've always got to have in your head, okay, so where's the next one? And sometimes the charging networks will help you with that. If you don't have, plug share on your phone or something like that, but they will, help you route to the closest place. So that's happened to me a couple of times, but not real often. But yes, it does happen. Sometimes the hardware breaks and then you call the network, and most of the time they can do a remote start, but not always. So plan B.
And just as a sort of follow up to that, a couple of you have sort of started to already answer this question, but I would love, I think were the sort of charging and range anxiety question is really salient for a lot of folks that are thinking about buying an EV, or just even, for the more anxious, just thinking about someone else driving an EV. It would be great to hear a bit more about sort of how you plan, or any sort of strategies you use for longer trips, or for when you're, that maybe, charging infrastructure might be scarce, or any sort of advice that you can offer to folks other than sort of holding on to your gas guzzler when it comes to those longer trips, or those trips to out of the way places. Whoever would like to start, go ahead.
Well, I think I kind of answered it. I mean, I use all of the apps. So PlugShare, a better route planner, which is good. If you're not familiar with that one, you tell it where you're going and where you're going to stop in between. Like in my case, it was from Annapolis, Maryland to Naples, Florida. Well, I put all the waypoints of friends I was going to see on the way. And this thing spit out an Excel sheet that told me where I was going to stop, how long I was going to be there, what it was going to cost. It was just amazing. So I used that as a guide, I didn't go with everything that it said. And I had different state of charge, at different places than it assumed that I did, but still it was really handy. And I just wish that Google Maps would start putting charging stations on their maps. That would be really good. And that's probably coming. But I'm not sure I answered your question.
You totally did. And just hearing about the apps and sharing, that knowledge with people, I think is really important. And, the idea that you could get a route planner that has a spreadsheet that has sort of the destinations, that sort of planning out that aspect of your trip for you, I think is certainly anxiety relieving, and also just a wonderful resource to know about. So
well, the other thing about the PlugShare app is that people check in and check out. So you can look at the location where you think you're going to stop, and you can tell if there have been the last 6 people who stopped there said that the hardware was broken. Well, don't go there.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yeah, I think at least around Charlottesville, chargers have become infinitely more reliable over the past couple of years. I went on a road trip this summer. I took my 2.5-year-old and my 9-year-old to New Hampshire by myself, and I did it in a straight shot. And so for that trip, I rented an SUV because I was like, I needed a bunch of stuff. The i3 is tiny, which normally works great, but for a big trip like this, it was like we needed some more space. So, and it kind of made me curious. So I figured out how much I was saving in gas as compared to electricity, and really the electricity is so cheap to fuel these vehicles. I think I'm saving a little over $1,000 a year. So for me to rent that SUV was about half of my savings. And I was like, cool, I'm still saving money. Most of the time I'm driving something that's not emitting any harmful, pollutants into the air. And then when I need to, I have the savings to cover renting something. And I take my hat off to you for doing that road trip though. It'd be cool. I was thinking I'm in like the 2.5-year-old potty training, right? So I'm just like, there are so many like, this is probably not the time to try to map out charging stations, but I might try it when he's a little older.
I did get to know all of the Walmarts in the South.
Time well spent. Yeah.
Good deals.
Shay, what have you done, Shay?
So when we travel down to LA, so my wife is an identical twin, and our new nephew is just turned 1. So we were out there during her pregnancy and when the baby was born. We always take the Prius. The one thing is, if it's just the 4 of us going, we have 5 kids. We only have 1 left in the house. So it used to be, the SUV, like Natalie said, if we needed to rent to go down to LA. And as they've slowly trickled out on their own, we only have the 16-year-old that's left with us. So if we need to take things with us, the great thing about the Prius is the seats come all the way down. And I I don't rent too many vehicles anymore. And we did have, like Chris said, a gas guzzler, you know, the one, you know, backup car, but we don't even have that any, except the Chevy, which I don't drive, but maybe once a week to keep it alive. But it's yeah, the one thing about old cars is that they don't, the Chevy Corvair, it doesn't have to pass an emissions test at all. It's exempt. And I'm always conscious. And I think that is what's made me not drive it as much as I used to when I was younger. I thought it was so cool. But for those long trips, back to your question, I definitely use the Prius versus the Tesla. And only because we have a 16-year-old that's a millennial and he's like, I want to stop, I want to eat, then I want to sleep, don't bother me. He's got like 16 personalities on that 5 to 6 hour drive that sometimes it's not even worth it. He's like, are we stopping again? Oh my God, are we ever going to get there? Just so we don't never have to stop in the Prius. It's like one shot all the way down just to go to the restroom. Like we can literally fill our tank up and just cruise all the way up and down and still have, you know, a quarter of a tank.
I see in the chat, somebody is suggesting that we tell people the non-Tesla charging infrastructure is getting better, and that is 100% true. In Charlottesville, they are popping up all over the place. There's one 3 minutes from my daughter's school. There's one right next to where I work. So yeah, the charging infrastructure for Teslas was kind of the first out, but for non-Teslas, it's actually pretty strong now. And Charlottesville is a city of 40,000. So I'm guessing probably that means smaller cities are getting better saturation with chargers. I think the VW settlement fund helped that. All the ones in Charlottesville are EVgo funded by VW.
Yeah.
One thing I noticed on my trip too is that the non-Tesla chargers on the fast ones on turnpikes in 95, for instance, now suddenly they've got a Tesla nozzle too. And there are fewer and fewer CHAdeMO nozzles, which is for the Japanese cars. So isn't that an interesting development?
Yeah. We have about 10 minutes left. I want to make sure we're getting to all the Q&A. So, the next few questions we'll do a little bit more, I think, rapid answers maybe. Did any of you all buy your electric vehicle used? And if so, what was that experience like? Anyone buy a used EV?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I bought my EV used. In my particular case, my brother-in-law actually works or was working for a Nissan dealership, so he knew that I was looking around for EVs, and he saw this Nissan Leaf with 4,000 miles on it at a really good price. So he notified me. So not everybody has that luxury, right? But that was how it happened. And we didn't get a chance. When you buy a used, you don't always get a chance to tap into like government incentives and stuff like that. So that's one thing to consider. But it still turned out to be a really, really good deal for what we got. Yeah, that's all I could. I mean, there's a lot of used electric vehicles on the market. There's a lot to choose from. Pretty much like most auto companies have EVs now. You got like Kia and a lot of the other ones have been mentioned already to this. Have like full EV at this point is Toyota. Has been kind of dragging their feet on that, but yeah, whether it be like VW, that's one I really like as far as what's that VW electric that they have, the EV Golf. That's pretty nice, solid car.
But there's another one now too, the ID4.
Yeah, that one's super sweet. Yeah, of course, if you can get that one, that would be new, I would presume, but yeah, and so the more that those new vehicles come out, though, those like hotter, everybody wants that particular car. For example, I know that Hyundai is coming out with their next EV that's looking super sweet too. The other EVs that are the prior generation, become more, in my experience, become more accessible. You start being able to tap into those at a lower price point. So right now, if you wanted to get a prior generation Nissan Leaf, last time I checked anyway, you can get it less than $10,000 with still like a decent number of, probably like 30,000 miles, 30, 40,000 miles. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So, and that'll serve your purposes for, like I said, for most people's local trips.
Yep, that's great. A lot of good deals out there.
I think, should we switch over to some of the Q&A questions, Stuart? And
Yeah, that's great.
Should I just go ahead and start reading them aloud?
Yeah.
There's a great question here about mechanics who specialize in EV vehicles. And so the question is there a directory of mechanics who specialize in plug-in vehicles? But I'd also love to hear a bit about folks' experience, if there is, do you go to a mechanic, or is that sort of part of the owning a car equation now, just not really part of the dynamic? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so what I tell people, which has been my experience, is there is essentially no maintenance on these cars, none. I mean, you get the tires rotated, brakes looked at maybe if you're not, doing the one pedal thing. There's no maintenance. So the operating cost is more than worth what might be a little bit of a jump of, your purchase price. However, having said that, there are, for instance, Tesla certified bodywork shops and probably mechanical shops as well for, if a Tesla is in an accident. For other brands, I don't know. But you have to go in knowing something about your car. It's the same when you're buying one too. You've got to do your homework first before you buy an EV, because most of the dealership people know nothing at all. That's changing slowly, but anyway.
And have any of you ever had any kind of mechanical type issue with your car? No. All right. Living the dream.
I think that though, this is the reason a lot of them are leased, because it's sort of people are uncertain about what it looks like to own and maintain an EV, which is, I think, why leasing is so popular. Also, battery life and stuff. Yeah.
Here's a question about if you've driven a regular gas car since owning an electric vehicle, what was the number one thing you noticed when you went back to driving a gas car?
Having to step on the brakes.
Yes, that. So when you're driving an EV, regenerative braking means when you take your foot off the brake, it starts braking the car and gathering the energy from that. So yeah, my biggest surprise was, oh yeah, this thing keeps coasting at full speed when I take my foot off the gas. I actually have to push on the brake. Yeah, same as you, Chris.
I have to say the same thing, and you don't have to, your brake life lasts longer. And I think Elvia mentioned it earlier, is you are reducing how much goes into our watersheds or on the freeway that goes into our water system. But yeah, I think that's what you noticed is I drive that Chevy. Can you imagine how heavy that car is? And from driving a really light Prius or Tesla, Teslas are heavy. They're pretty heavy cars, but yeah, I think it's the pressing on the brakes too.
Elvia, have you driven a gas car since switching to electric? Is there one thing that stuck out in your mind of difference?
Yeah, the smell of the exhaust. And the only time I've done that is when I took my bolt in for tire rotation. And they gave me a gas car as a loaner. It's like, I said, are you kidding me? That's what they did. Yeah. No, but it's the exhaust. It just kills me.
Yeah, that's number two for me. That's probably the first thing you notice is that's probably the first thing you notice is the smell of the exhaust. at least for me.
I would guess that number 2 is the sound, right? Like suddenly you're in this contraption that's like vibrating and making a lot of noise. If you could, one thing I think would be really interesting to hear, you've alluded to this sort of the question of, going in and having the knowledge yourself and doing the research before you go in and buy the car. What do you think is sort of the number one question to ask when you're buying an EV or piece of information that somebody should know when they're going in to potentially buy an EV for the first time?
Great question.
Yeah.
I think what Chris said earlier about knowing your needs and finding something that fits those is right on. And I like Elvia, I'm like, go all electric, but for some people that won't work, right? And like a hybrid is better for sure than an all gas vehicle. So I would say know your needs and then translate those needs into your range with a charge. And then any gas backup or hybrid, whatever else is a component of that mix. So for me, I have about 160 miles on a full charge. And then I have 60 miles gas backup on 2 gallons. So for me, it was like that 2-gallon gas backup was really important because sometimes I end up in the middle of Virginia where there is nothing, like not even a 110-volt plug to plug into without a shotgun attached to the other end. So that was important for me. And I think, Chris, that was just right on. Like, know your limits and your needs, and then find a solution that will fit those. And there are all like a whole range of options from all electric to hybrid.
I put a document in the chat. It's a PDF that has the cars that are currently in production right now with range, with cost, and a whole bunch of other stuff. It's very useful. It hasn't been updated since the beginning of the year, so it doesn't, for instance, have the VW ID4, but it does have the Mach-E. And there's one line in that that's really interesting. There's a yellow line in the middle of this PDF that shows you the average cost of any kind of car in the United States, new, of course. And so above that are the EVs that cost the same or less. And then there's admittedly, a lot more that cost more than the average cost of a car, but that's a good reference point. And
yeah, it's the same website that I'm thinking about that I use. That's really powerful. The website that I'm thinking about, it might be the same thing. They show all the price points for, I think, leases. I can't remember if it's for sale, but certainly for lease for EVs and plug-in hybrids across the US. And then that way you're able to say, oh, hey, to your local dealership, are you able to match this price point for this other dealership that's located, next town over or whatever. So it's a good, I found that to be really valuable, because then I was able to get our lease for, I think it was like cheaper than anything else that was like in the whole Bay Area. So and it was because awesome. I leveraged that. Yeah, for sure. Sorry, what was the question again? I forgot the
question was if there was sort of one thing that folks that are going in to buy an EV should know, or a key question to sort of ask, at the dealership.
So that was a good one. I mean, I think the good thing is, I guess it's good or bad depending on how you look at it, that there's so many more options now than there was like 2 years ago. And so there's more flavors for you to sample. I mean, it's really, to me now, yeah, there's performance, there's sort of range and that kind of thing, but it's really like, are you gonna love the car? Like, does the car feel well? It's just sort of the same type of buying experience that you would have for a gas powered vehicle. I mean, there's pickups now that are going to be coming out. For me, that's going to be my next EV, is going to be a pickup. I'm going to convert to like a camper awesome. Pickup type situation. So that'll be once they can rack up the dollars, and once I would love to see a Toyota Tacoma electric. Boom. If Toyota, if you're listening, I want that electrified, and you got my dollars. So,
That's awesome.
so you know, I mean, whatever it is that you're looking for, and like what the look, that VW that's coming out, super clean look, really nice. The Hyundai, that one also is super awesome. So you know, that's all I would say to that, is just pick what you're gonna love, and what's gonna be useful for your needs.
That's great advice. Believe it or not, we're at time. So I just want to say thank you so much to the EV owners, Natalie, Elva, Shay, Chris. Thank you very much for joining us. It's been very helpful to the folks that dialed in. Thanks so much to Andrea and Green Latinos. If you want to learn more about Green Latinos, go visit greenlatinos.org. We just put that in the chat. And to find out more about Generation 180, go to generation180.org. And while you're there, we have a Going Electric pledge. Sign the Going Electric pledge. Make a statement that your next car will be electric, whenever that may be. So thanks everyone for being here, and looking forward to another one of these sessions in the future. Have a good rest of your week, and have a good weekend. Thanks, y'all.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks. Keep up the good work.